Hey class, welcome to Module 5, Week 5. This week we're going to be talking about macroeconomic analysis and prospective analysis. So macroeconomic analysis is different than industry analysis. So industry analysis has a much more narrow focus. We're only talking about one particular industry, whereas in macroeconomics, you're talking about all industries, total demand, and you're talking about things like wage growth, government policy, financial market activity, global demand, those type of things that all are also happening outside of a particular industry, but they impact that particular industry. So let's just take a look at this graphic that I created here. Okay, so in the center, this is total demand for all goods and services, and that is impacted by many, many different things. So for example, domestic households. So a domestic household like your house, this is talking about consumer consumption, which if incomes are high and there is wage growth and there is excessive discretionary income, then consumers are going to be more likely to make purchases, which impacts total demand. If corporations are doing well, if taxes are low, then that's going to encourage investment, which is also going to impact total demand. It's also going to impact wages. So if wages grow, then that creates more income, and which also leads to excessive discretionary spend, which impacts total demand. Same thing with global growth. So if the global economy is growing, then you're going to see a rise in exports and imports. And exports would impact the total demand for goods and services produced within the U.S. Financial markets. So if it's easy to get credit and loans, then consumers are going to be more likely to borrow, which will increase the money supply for consumers, which is going to increase total demand. But financial markets, that's going to depend on monetary policy, which is set by the government. So if interest rates are rising, then that is going to make it more difficult to get access to credit or loans, which potentially decrease total demand for goods and services. The government has a lot of influence on different things, like financial policy, or financial markets rather, is influenced by monetary policy. Global demand can be sort of tapered by trade policy, also fiscal policy. So all of these things will impact total demand, and the government itself is going to be consuming, whether it's just day-to-day purchases they're going to have to make, that will impact total demand. Whether it's investments, that will impact total demand. Like if they're investing in spending, that of course goes back into the broader economy. And of course, they're receiving taxes from corporations, and they're receiving taxes from you and me, and that's their revenue. And they're also doling it out in transfer payments, which would be things like entitlement payments like Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid. And as people get those payments, then that flows back to domestic households, and then that will increase total demand for different goods and services. So a lot of different things happening in macroeconomics. So there are three different types of indicators. One is so it's leading, and then there's coincident, and then lagging. Leading is going to be, those are going to be indicators that are before a turning point. So you'll often hear, I don't know if anybody listens to Marketplace or the Wall Street Journal report, but they often talk about leading indicators such as new orders for consumer goods and materials, for new building permits, for weekly claims for unemployment, because these are all things that typically will change right before there is a downturn in the economy. So you'll see a spike in weekly claims for unemployment whenever the economy is in a downturn. You'll see a decline in new orders for consumer goods and materials because demand is going down. So you'll see fewer new orders. You'll see fewer new building permits because demand is going down. Things like that. Coincident indicators, those are usually happening close to a turning point, and lagging indicators occurring after a turning point. So you see less of a focus on those whenever people are trying to predict another economic downturn. All right, so the other concept we're covering this week is perspective analysis. And this is something that is very useful. Students in my prior classes have found this to be very useful. And it's essentially just making projections, taking historical data and using that to make projections. So got the graphic here. So it just shows year 1 through year 4, and then we're forecasting here from year 5 and out. And that's, you're going to be doing this for your project in your model. And let me just go to that. Well, first let me say that if you click this link, this will take you to a really good, it's an old article, but it's still very, very relevant. And it talks about all different kinds of forecasting techniques. It's pretty good read, but you don't have to read that in order to make projections. What you can do is just use what's available in the model. So here's the model template, and it already has built into the model a mechanism to help you project. And so these are some of the most common ones that I've used and others use, and that's just using a percentage growth as a metric, and then also using a percentage of sales for expenses or for gross profit as a metric. So for example, if you type in here, well, my keyboard is not working. Okay, there we go. So if you type in, let's say 100,000 here, and then so what that's going to do is it's going to assume 2.5% growth from here on out. And you could go and change this later if you wanted to. If you think there's going to be another spike in a couple of years, change that to 4.5. And then I would look at history for gross profit and see what the historical numbers for that would be. If it's 7%, if it's 15%, change that. Then look at operating expenses. If that's 25%, change that. And if there are any other sorts of income or other items, interest income, other items that you would want to forecast, you'd put those here. And then that gives you your projections. So down here, net income projected for the future. So that's how I would recommend using the model. You're welcome to certainly look at the Harvard Business Review and try to come up with any sort of advanced forecast, but you're certainly not required to do that. So that is pretty much it this week that I wanted to cover here. Make sure you read the chapters 5 and 10, and then you've got your milestone to turn in for the week, and that's it. So have a great week, and let me know if you have questions.